Hi everyone, and welcome to today's lecture. We're going to be focusing on cognitive development for early childhood. Just as a reminder, if there are slides that have only imagery, make sure that you take a peek at those and review them for full understanding of the concepts, as well as if there are additional links to videos and articles, please make sure to take a peek at those as well to ensure that you have all of the information for today's lecture. To get our lecture started, I did want to include a little bit about language development for children. So on this slide, you'll see different components of language that we're starting to notice during the early childhood years. The first one is phonetics, and so this is the physical production of speech sounds. So when we are speaking and we are producing different sounds of speech, we are engaging in the use of s, t, h, all different kinds of sounds of speech. We also have to look at phonology and morphology. So phonology is the smallest unit of meaning, so the sounds of language, so how different sounds are produced. And then morphology is the different words or vocabulary. And so with phonology, this is our way of thinking about, like I said, the sounds of speech, so how they come together. So k, at, or k, ah, ooh. So different sounds that they make. And so the phonetics is how we produce those sounds. And then phonology is the sounds of language. Morphology is when we start to form different words together. So I'm taking the k and the at, and I'm forming cat. And then syntax is our grammar, or how our sentences are formed. So the cat walks to the park. And so I'm forming a sentence using different words, and I'm engaging in different sounds of language, my phonology. And then we have semantics, which is our discourse. So this is the purpose of our sentences. So what is the actual meaning behind them? So having an understanding that when I say the word cat, I know what a cat is, what it means. So if I say the cat is walking or the cat is eating, I have an understanding to that reference. Now it's important to think about the components of language and our ability to recognize and understand our thinking behind that. And so we're going to get a little bit more into our thinking and our use of language. So when we are developing different aspects of our thinking and our feeling, as well as how we put concepts together and our imagination, this can be a great conjunction with components of language. And then last but not least, we have pragmatics. So this is using language with others. So our ability to communicate and engage with others. So we will get more into aspects of engagement with others in our social and emotional lecture, but basically we're just seeing that pragmatics is how different aspects of language is formed together. One aspect of language that is common during the preschool years is the grammatical error of overregularization. So this is when children apply regular pattern to a form of words. So this is in the past tense. They may change the vowels, or they may engage in substitute changes. And last but not least, they might add final consonants or word endings, such as an S on the end of words. So I have included a video here that talks a little bit more about this, but having an understanding that children engage in over-regularization can help us to better support them when they are in the beginning stages of the other aspects of components of language. So when they're starting to put sentence structures together and they're starting to communicate more meaningful aspects of their world around them, we have a better understanding that when children say that they go to the store, they mean went. And so this is something that just comes over time as a correction in language. And so this grammatical error again occurs during 3 to 5 years old. And we see that children are commonly using this when they don't have the rule that typically fits, or they overuse the rules that are commonly there. So we put S's and EDs on lots of different words and say, so they are overusing that aspect of language acquisition. When thinking about supporting language, there are many different things that we can do with young children. I've included a great video here that goes into a PBS discussion on talk, read, and sing with young children and how we can support their language by talking, by reading, and by singing. I also wanted to include an image of a caregiver reading with young children during this time. We can also engage in parallel talk, self-talk, repetition, asking children questions. So a great way to ask questions is by having them be open-ended. So open-ended questions allow for children to expand on their language. So one great thing that we can do for children is language expansions. We can also engage in language extensions. So a language expansion is when we repeat what the child is saying and then expand on the child's utterance. So if the child says that a car goes, we might say, yes, your car is going. And I might say, where do you think your car is going? So I'm expanding on where the child's current knowledge and understanding of their language is and giving an additional aspect of what could be and allowing for the child to engage while asking that open-ended question. Whereas with the language extension is repetition, expansion, and providing additional information. So the child might say, car go, and I might say, yes, your car is going. It's going very fast. I see you have a blue car. And so I'm adding information into the context of what the child is saying, what they are doing. One thing to also consider is that when children are bilingual or they speak 2 or more languages, we see that, oops, sorry, I got cut off there. So what I was trying to say was that when we're considering bilingualism and recognizing the influence of having 2 or more languages spoken, we can see that there are increased abilities to concentrate, solve problems, and focus, and being multilingual is associated with better mental flexibility, cultural competence, stronger connections, as well as in the future, greater accessibility for different types of work as well as engagement with others. And so I have included a TED Talk video here that supports the aspect of being bilingual. And so I did want to include that here in supporting language to consider the element of when we're talking, we're reading, we're singing, we're engaging in language extensions and expansions. We can also do this in multiple languages. So if a child is already speaking multiple languages, it's important for us to create an atmosphere where those multi-languages are able to be increased, but we can also add into the child's context of their environment and their language usage by adding in different aspects of multiple languages. This slide just goes to support that language is a tool that is used for many different aspects of play and learning, mathematics and science, reading and writing, and dramatic and social play. So for this lecture, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on aspects of dramatic and social play. We'll also dive a little bit more into social play in our coming up lectures. So for dramatic and social play, we're considering different aspects of creating scenarios, sharing our ideas. We also do want to consider aspects of mathematics and science with cognition, so categorization of people and objects and places, remembering different aspects of time and dates, and we'll also focus today on ordering and sequencing of events. We also, of course, are always going to need aspects of reading and writing, so listening skills, recognition of letters, sounds, and having a wide range of vocabulary. So do consider, as mentioned before, the different components of language and how this does support all different areas and how we can create opportunities for children to engage in language in all areas of development: math, science, reading, writing, and dramatic and social play. To get started, we're going to be talking about Piaget's theory of stages of cognitive development. So just to give some information, just remember that cognitive development is how children think, explore, and figure things out, and it is the development of knowledge, skills, problem solving, different depositions in which children think about and understand the world around them. And so we're specifically going to be focusing on the pre-operational stage of development. So this is when children are engaging in symbolic thinking and using proper syntax and grammar to express their concepts, as well as using imagination. So we do see that this is occurring between the ages of 2 to about 7 years old. And this is the suggestion of thinking about symbols. So not just via the senses and motor skills like we would see in the sensory-motory period, but we are now starting to have symbolic representation and thought, and this includes language, imitation, and animism. So we're going to get into more of the pre-operational stage in depth on the next few slides. If we dive deeper into Piaget's pre-operational stage of cognitive development, we have a few substages. And so the first one is going to be symbolic function. And so when we're thinking about symbolic function, this is occurring with the aspects of categorization of schemas. So remember, we're thinking about different categories of our information and how we might put those into different representing areas within our brain. So again, how we think, explore, and the different kinds of ways that we understand the world. So Piaget talked about functionalism, so how children categorize and organize information in their brains and make sense of it. So the schemas is a way of functionalizing information. We also see that children are structuralizing information, and so there's an idea of how different schemas work and how children start to understand and organize information across time. And we do see that with symbolic function, this is an idea of how children can mentally represent objects that are not present. So you'll notice that I've included a focused observation here of preschool age children where they're in the dramatic play area, and so you can watch in the video to see how they are pretending to interact with the aspects of the caregiving for a baby doll, and they are able to have representation of objects that are not present, and so they are using symbolic thought as well as a combination of their imaginations and language, and so they're thinking about things in symbols that aren't necessarily there. And so this is a primary way that we can connect symbolic function, is when we're observing children in the dramatic play area. Another aspect of symbolic function is egocentrism. So your text goes into this in a little more detail, and I've also included a video that talks about the 3 mountain tasks. So this is a great video to watch to go more into the aspect of egocentrism and perspective taking for our pre-operational age children. So around the ages again of 2 to 7 years old. And so basically when we're thinking of egocentrism, this is a term that is used to talk about children's tendency to think about the world entirely from their own perspective. So they are having difficulty in taking the perspectives of others. So you'll notice in the video with the 3 mountain task, this is a classic Piagetian task where children are asked to consider the perspective of another. And you'll see that in the video, children who are within the stage of pre-operational development are unable to take the perspective of the adult or another person when asked what they see in terms of where the placement of the materials on a table are. And we also see that as children get older, they're better able to recognize somebody else's perspective. So this can come into play in a lot of different instances. If there is a problem that needs to be solved and maybe somebody's feelings were hurt, a child who is still in this stage of pre-operational development is going to have a more difficult time recognizing the perspective of another and how someone might feel versus once we get into our concrete operational stage of development. And so some factors of how children's thinking may be driven during this time period is rigid and illogical thinking. And so they might be asked, what does this person's perspective look like, and they may replicate the perspective of that of their own. So because they are only thinking in terms of their personal experiences, then everybody else must be also thinking that kind of way and feeling that kind of way because they are. We also see that animism is also something that is happening during this time period. And so this is the notion that children have a belief that inanimate objects are alive and they have a purpose. And so this is something where I've given a couple examples to kind of help you to recognize this better. So blowing paper in the wind, it could be alive because it's moving. A stuffed animal that gets dropped is sad and hurting. So we will see a lot of animism taking place during dramatic play. So as children are starting to use symbols as a function of their thinking, we see that they are also recognizing aspects of believing that inanimate objects have a purpose and are alive. So again, a stuffed animal or a baby doll might be sad and has their feelings hurt if we're playing doctor. So I'd also recommend utilizing this slide when you are watching the video on the previous one related to the children in the Dramatic Play Center. The next preoperational substage is intuitive thought. So one of the big aspects here with intuitive thought is children's reasoning. And so we see that children fail to understand the true relationship between the cause and effect of different aspects of the world because they base their conclusions on concrete data rather than inductive or deductive reasoning. So when we're thinking about our aspects of reasoning, inductive reasoning requires us to have an observation of the world around us, make a generalization, and then propose some sort of theory. And then with deductive reasoning, we take an aspect of a theory, and then we lead ourselves to coming up with a way to experiment and prove that theory. But when children are engaging in understanding the cause and effect of different aspects of the world, they have engaged in something called transductive reasoning, according to Piaget. So they are connecting aspects based on one specific conclusion about their observation from another and making direct connections to that. So a good example of this is one that was actually with my own brother during this time of pre-operational development. And so we were at Costco and they had Costco pizza there. And when he was little, he really loved pizza and everything pizza was all that he ate for a while. And so this example is when a child has only seen a single slice of pizza, they assume that the pizza is triangular in shape rather than round. And so at the time of getting the pizza, we got one that was a round shape or a square shape. I can't remember exactly, but we got one that was not a triangular shape, as you commonly would see when a slice of pizza is cut out of a larger round. And so during this time, it was imperative to him that his pizza slice needed to be triangular in order for it to be pizza, because he had had no other interactions with pizza other than it being triangular shape, and he wasn't able to make additional observations, and he was only drawing his conclusions based on the one way of knowing about the world and knowing about how pizza is and how it looks. And so we can see that this connects directly to children's schemas and their development of the world. So they have not full understanding of every aspect about how information is categorized because they're basing their understanding of the world on one singular event, one singular observation, and drawing their conclusions based on that. Another aspect of intuitive thought is the aspect of seriation. So this is the ability for children to put things in a sequential order. So we do notice that during the pre-operational stage, children are engaging in minimal seriation, and so they are able to put some things in a sequential order, but it's not apparent until concrete operational stage that children can have the full aspect of seriation. So you'll see here that I have provided an example of a common Piagetian task where a child is given 10 different sticks. In this one, it doesn't show 10, but it gives the same example in imagery. So children are given sticks to organize by size, and you can see here that children during the pre-operational stage are not at a complete level of being able to do this, but once they're in a concrete operational stage, seriation is able to be fully flushed out. This is also common when we're considering different aspects of age, so asking to order family members in age. Other things are organizing toys by size or weight, books on a bookshelf. So there's lots of different aspects of seriation that we engage in our day-to-day lives based on different elements. We also see that children are exhibiting aspects of centration, and so their thinking is limited by the aspect of one situation. And you'll notice on the next slide I go into more detail on conservation tasks, and one of the aspects of conservation tasks is that we see that children are exhibiting centration. And so again, this is related to their ability to think in a limited situation. So this includes characteristics of where children focus on or center around one idea. So this is excluding all other ideas, and this does tap into egocentrism potentially for children. We do also see that children are perception bound, so they are focusing on more salient features of a task and the most obvious things that they are able to see. And this is apparent again in the centration as well as the conservation tasks. And so we see that they are focusing on one aspect of the world, and children are highly focused on appearance. And so part of this aspect of the perception bound is how they focus on different aspects of appearance, and that not all attributes of a person, a place, or parts of the world are apparent to them. So they tend to get hyper fixated on the way that things look rather than examining all variables of a task. So we'll see that in the conservation tasks on the next slide. We do also see that reversibility is difficult for children, so they do have a hard time remembering what came before, so that mental process of reverse. And so we see that irreversibility, so this is where children think that nothing can be undone and a thing cannot be restored to the way it was before change occurred. So again, having a hard time remembering things that happened beforehand. So this could be related to when they were younger, at a different stage in their life. This could be related to simply even something that occurred over the weekend, or related to a task that they were engaging in. On this slide, you'll see aspects of conservation tasks that were common in Piaget's studying and are still used today to recognize children in the pre-operational stage of cognitive development. So conservation is the principle that the amount of a substance remains the same or is conserved when its appearance changes. And so we do see that conservation is not yet mastered during pre-operational development, and we see that children have a hard time engaging in conservation tasks, and conservation tasks are specifically geared towards helping children to test out the properties of objects. And so Piaget designed 5 basic tasks that he provided young children related to number, length, liquid, mass, and area. And so you can see on the graphic on the right, I've shown the different conservation tasks that were specifically connected to these 5 basic areas. And so we have here the most common one in the middle is the conservation of liquid. And so you'll notice that children are looking at if there is the same amount of liquid inside of 2 glasses, where one glass is a short wide glass and the other glass is a tall skinny glass. And in the YouTube video that is linked on this page, you will see an instance of a child during the pre-operational stage engaging in this specific task. Another classic example is one with the conservation of mass. So children are asked if Play-Doh or dough or clay that is in a ball, does it have the same amount of mass when it is flattened? And you can see that when these tasks are presented to children, we are showing them as it is occurring. So I have a ball that I'm rolling and making out of Play-Doh, and then I ask the child, when I present the ball to them next to another ball that I've just rolled, so I have 2 balls that I've rolled, do they have the same amount? And the child, when they look at them, if they look the same, they will say yes. And then if I take one of those balls and I squish it flat, I say, do they have the same amount, or is one more or one less in their mass? The child will say that the one that is flattened is different and potentially has more, as they can see that it has spread out. And so we do see that there are different tasks that could be done related to number, length, liquid, mass, and area, but these are the common tools that have been used. So the marbles, the glass and the liquid, the Play-Doh, as well as the conservation of area using this image with the different animal. And so again, please take a peek at this video so that you have a better understanding of the examples of conservation tasks. On this slide, I've provided a little bit of information related to classification. So this is one of the key areas of cognitive development that we look at for young children. And so I have included from the Learning Foundations aspects of 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 5-year-olds, and what classification skills look like during this time period. So we see that classification at 3 years old looks like children putting different objects into piles and groups and attributing their different aspects such as color, shape, and so they are limited to the amount of aspects and attributes that they can accomplish in one sitting, and this increases over time. We also see that children are putting things into similar groups, and so again, that categorization is coming into play, and they are classifying different kinds of objects. They can also classify people. They can classify different types of ways that we might be looking or the ways that we might be dressed. So there's different aspects of how we might categorize and put similar things into those categories. Children also may label each grouping, even though these labels may be overgeneralized. We do also see that children are starting to begin to have basic understandings of the function of objects and how they might be grouped. So they might be putting together transportation items because they help people to move. And so they recognize that a bus helps somebody to move, and a wagon helps somebody to move, and a bike helps somebody to move. And so these are transportation objects because they help somebody to move. And they start to also match pictures of familiar objects together. We also see that children are engaging in a lot more classification tasks related to objects that they have in their everyday environment. So we see that puzzles and shape sorters are starting to become more common during this time of play. We also see that children are beginning to sort objects by single characteristics, and they are doing this around 60 months. And so if we're looking again at different shapes and sizes, children are noticing the different categorizations based on how many sides a triangle versus a rectangle might have. Next, we're going to focus a little bit on Vygotsky, and Vygotsky focused on social learning theory. He specifically wanted to dive more into the aspects of how children's cognitive development is embedded within a social context, so truly focusing on elements of caregivers and their interactions with young children and their ability to influence how children are thinking and feeling. And so we see someone who is intellectually growing is stimulated and directed by an older and more skilled member of society. When we are looking at social learning theory, we see that guided participation is extremely common during this aspect of thinking, so how people are learning from others and being guided in more detail through experiences and exploration. We do also see that the way that we are as mentors and role models is to present challenges, to offer assistance without potentially taking over, to add crucial information into a child's current abilities. And so this comes into play when we think about the zone of proximal development. And so this is an opportunity for an adult to be able to support a child where we're meeting their current skill level and then presenting them with appropriate challenge. We're offering assistance, and we're giving them crucial information that they may need to know in order to complete the task with more appropriateness. So for example, if we are considering the image here on the right, having an understanding of a child's fine motor skills and cognitive ability to know the step-by-step process of shoe tying will be important for us to recognize how much assistance the child needs in order to complete this task. So what would be an appropriate challenge for this child? How much scaffolding would I need? What areas can I provide and encourage motivation? So that scaffolding piece is coming into play when we're thinking about that temporary support and how we're tailoring our support specifically to the learner's needs and the learner's abilities. So if we were to take a whole classroom full of preschoolers and practice tying our shoes, we might have varying levels of where children are at. And so my ability as the adult to scaffold is going to look slightly different. So some children may need different kinds of directions. So if I were to reflect back on my knowledge of when I learned to tie shoes, I was always taught to do 2 bunny loops and cross them over. But I know a lot of people learned where they have you go around the tree and then under the tree. And so there are different ways that we might learn how to tie shoes and we could still get to the same result. And that may be apparent based on the information that was added, the kind of assistance that was provided to us. And so do consider that scaffolding looks different for different children. Same with when we tap into their zone of proximal development, where the learner is currently at and where they need more support. We do also see that children engage in something called over imitation. I kept wanting to say intimidation. Over imitation. And so this is where they start to copy an action that is not relevant and common to the part of behavior that is learned. And so this could be that when we are using, again, the example for shoe tying, they may engage in copying an action that doesn't help them to necessarily reach the goal of tying their shoes, but it could be part of what their adult is doing during that time period. And so this is common with our preschool age children, where they imitate adults' actions that are irrelevant or inefficient. So maybe when you're preparing to tie your shoes, you do a little bit of a shuffle with your socks and you pull them up all the way, or you like to extra tighten the laces before you actually start to begin to loop your shoes over, or you like to adjust the tongue of the shoes. And so there's different ways that we might pick up on those actions, and this is learned through observation. So again, tapping back into specifically how Vygotsky focused on social learning and how cognitive development is embedded in a social context. Theory of the mind is the last thing that we're going to focus on today. So this is coming into our ability to recognize and understand how our mind works. And so we're able to make different distinctions between the physical world and mental events and think about how things appear and what they really are in different perceptions. And so we're able to observe as well as infer others' perceptions and their thoughts and feelings. And so we're able to grasp understanding that people's mental states do affect their behavior. And so one of the aspects of the theory of the mind was through the false belief test. And I have included a link to a video here that goes into more detail on the false belief test with Alison Gopnik. And then Alison Gopnik also talks about what the theory of the mind is in more detail in the second video. But I wanted to share a little story about the original false belief test done in the 80s called the Sally Ann test. And so basically the false belief test is helping us to better understand different mental states and how they affect people's behaviors and understanding of how the mind works. And so children were presented with a character, a doll, named Sally, and Sally had a desirable object such as chocolate or a ball or a toy that a child would be interested in. And then Sally ends up leaving that in a basket and is removed from the scene where the children are. And in her absence, another character, Anne, moves the object from the basket into a box that is not able to be seen by certain people. And so children are asked to predict where Sally will look for the object when she returns. So Sally originally had the desirable object, left the scene, and then Anne, the second character, comes in and hides that object. And 4-year-olds tend to pass the test, and they're correctly able to attribute the false belief to where Sally will find the object, while younger children tend to fail. And since then, many forms of the false belief test have been used to determine whether individuals are able to recognize how others' perceptions work. And so we can see in the false belief test on the first video here, it goes into a little bit more detail related to the crayon box false belief test. And so children are asked what they think is inside a crayon box, and most children are going to say, well, there's crayons inside the crayon box. Of course, it's crayons. And then you'll notice that when they open the box, something else is revealed. And so I want you to watch the video and kind of see how that looks, and then children are asked what they had thought was in the box before they opened it, and then they're able to say that the item that was in there was what they originally thought, even though it was presented to them after the questioning. So I hope you enjoyed today's lecture, and be sure to again check out all the video links throughout the slides, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye everyone.